He thought it was just another episode, but he was wrong. The stage lights shimmered in their familiar rhythm, washing the Family Feud set in warm golds and deep blues. The studio buzzed with laughter and anticipation, that comfortable noise Steve Harvey knew by heart. For years, he had stood under those lights, his presence larger than life, guiding families through humor, hope, and the joyful chaos that made the show what it was. But that day, something felt different. He couldn't name it yet, a stillness in the air, a quiet undercurrent of something that would soon change everything. It began with a family like any other. 5 faces, all beaming, lined up behind a single podium. They called themselves the Harris family. They looked ordinary, everyday people, but there was something about the youngest member that drew the eye immediately. A teenage boy, maybe 17, stood at the end of the line. He wasn't nervous or showy. His posture was humble, his smile soft but real, the kind that carried both light and loss. Steve greeted them with his usual charm, his suit perfectly pressed, his laughter echoing easily. The crowd clapped, the music played, the atmosphere was bright. But when Steve turned toward the boy, the room seemed to slow. "How you doing, young man?" he asked. The boy's voice was calm. "I'm good, Mr. Harvey. Real good. Thank you." Something in his tone, respectful, grounded, caught Steve off guard. He smiled. "You lookin' sharp today. You ready to win some money for your family?" The boy nodded. "Yes, sir. But it's not about the money." The audience chuckled, assuming it was part of the banter. Steve laughed too, playing along. "Not about the money? You sure you on the right show, boy?" But the teenager didn't flinch or smile. He just looked at Steve, eyes clear and steady, and said quietly, "It's about honoring my dad." The laughter faded. Just like that, the air changed. Even the hum of the lights seemed to quiet down. Steve's smile softened, and his usual rhythm, the quick wit, the comedic timing slipped away for a moment. He lowered his microphone slightly. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus," the boy said. "And who's your dad?" Steve asked. Marcus looked down for a moment, then up again. His name was Samuel Harris. He was a firefighter. He passed away last year. This was his favorite show. A stillness fell over the entire room. The audience, hundreds of strangers, leaned forward without realizing it. The laughter that once filled the studio now felt distant, replaced by something heavier, something sacred. Steve took a slow breath. "Your dad a firefighter?" "Yes, sir." Steve nodded, his voice quieter now. "That's a real hero right there. And you came here today for him?" Marcus nodded again. "Yes, sir. He used to say our family could win this thing one day, so we're here to finish what he started." The words hung in the air like a prayer. The camera zoomed slowly toward Marcus's face, young, brave, trembling just enough to remind everyone watching that he was still a kid. The studio audience didn't make a sound. Steve placed his cue cards on the podium, the paper fluttering slightly under the studio lights. He didn't speak for a few seconds. He just looked at the boy, this young man who carried the weight of a promise made in love and loss, and he nodded, his own eyes glistening. "All right," Steve said softly. "We gon' play this one for your daddy today." The crowd erupted in gentle applause, the kind that isn't loud but carries warmth. Marcus's family turned toward him, smiling through tears. His mother reached for his shoulder, squeezing it gently. The music swelled again, but something had changed. This wasn't a show anymore. It was a story, one being written right there, live, under the bright lights of a television studio where millions would one day watch and feel the same ache. Steve took his place again, his voice steady, but his heart already heavy with something he couldn't shake. He had seen loss before. He had comforted people before. But there was something about this boy, about his composure, his quiet dignity that reached deeper than usual. "Okay," Steve said, forcing a small smile. "Let's get started, Harris family." We asked 100 people. But even as the words rolled off his tongue, he couldn't help but glance at Marcus again. The boy stood at attention, focused, his father's memory wrapped around him like armor. And somewhere in that moment, between the laughter, the questions, the lights, Steve Harvey began to realize that he wasn't just hosting a show. He was witnessing a legacy. Because before the day was over, that teenager's answer would make him stop everything and remind everyone watching that sometimes the bravest people are the ones still learning how to carry love through grief. The round began, but the energy on stage had shifted completely. You could feel it, the air heavier now, though somehow gentler too. The Harris family wasn't just playing to win, they were holding something sacred together. Steve Harvey could sense it. Years of hosting had taught him to read rooms, to know when a moment was about more than laughs or points. This was one of those moments. The first question flashed on the board. Name something people wish they could say to someone they've lost. Steve paused, blinking at the card in his hand. The timing, almost divine. He glanced up, his gaze drifting across the family before finally landing on Marcus, the teenage boy who'd come here to honor his father. For a second, he couldn't move. Even the camera operators hesitated, understanding the weight of the coincidence. "All right now," Steve said softly, his voice slower than usual. "Y'all ready for this?" The buzzer sounded ding. The older sister on Marcus's team answered quickly. "I love you." Ding. Number one answer. Applause rippled through the studio, but it wasn't the usual loud, chaotic energy. It was softer, warmer. The kind of applause that carried love instead of excitement. They kept playing, round after round. Every answer from the Harris family felt infused with something deeper humor that came from healing, joy, laced with remembrance. When Steve cracked a joke, they laughed genuinely, but beneath each laugh was the echo of a promise. Marcus didn't say much in the first few minutes. He smiled, nodded, stayed composed, but Steve kept glancing at him, feeling an inexplicable pull. There was something behind those quiet eyes, something unspoken. Then came the moment. It was the final question of the round. Name something a parent teaches you that stays with you forever. Marcus buzzed in. The sound cut through the air like a spark. Steve raised his eyebrows. "All right, young blood, you got in first. What you got for me?" The boy's voice was calm. "How to be brave." The room went still. Not quiet still. Steve blinked. Once. Twice. The audience didn't cheer. The scoreboard didn't light up right away. The silence stretched long enough for everyone to feel it. And then ding. Top answer. The crowd gasped. Some clapped. Others didn't know what to do except breathe. Steve looked down at his cue cards, then back up. He set the cards aside. Slowly. Deliberately. "Say that again, son." Marcus didn't flinch. "How to be brave." The boy's voice cracked just slightly on the word brave. That's when it happened. The wall Steve Harvey had built through decades of professionalism, laughter, and composure. It began to break. He pressed his lips together, his eyes glistening under the lights. "You said your dad taught you that?" Steve asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. He told me being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep showing up anyway." The audience sighed collectively, like an exhale they'd all been holding in. Steve took a step closer to the podium. His voice trembled, just barely. That's a powerful lesson, young man. You know, I've heard a lot of answers on this stage, but that one right there?" He paused. "That one's special." Marcus smiled faintly, his chin quivering. "It's the last thing he told me, Mr. Harvey, right before he left for his last shift." Steve froze. He said, Marcus continued, "If something ever happens to me, don't stop being brave. Keep showing up for your family. Keep making them proud." A hush spread across the studio, like a tide pulling everything into stillness. The cameras zoomed in slowly, the boy's eyes glistening, his mother's tears falling silently, Steve's shoulders rising and falling with the weight of his breath. And then, right there on live television, Steve Harvey, the man known for his laughter, bowed his head and wept. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just softly, a single tear rolling down his cheek, his hand pressed against his mouth as if trying to contain everything he was feeling. The audience followed. No one clapped, no one spoke. People cried silently. Strangers united by one boy's courage. When Steve finally lifted his head, his voice cracked as he spoke. "You know, I try to make people laugh every day. But sometimes, he stopped for a moment, struggling to find the words. Sometimes people like you come along and remind us why we're really here. It ain't about games or cameras. It's about heart. He placed a hand over his chest. Your daddy's proud, son. I know it. I can feel it. The crowd erupted not in noise, but in warmth. Applause washed over the studio, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Steve smiled through tears, shaking his head gently. Man, you just taught me something today. The buzzer sounded to signal the next round, but nobody moved. Not yet. Steve wiped his eyes, laughing softly through the emotion. I ain't never cried on this show like this, he said, chuckling to himself. But that right there, that's real. He turned to the camera, his tone reverent. If you're watching this at home, remember what that young man said. Be brave. Keep showing up. Somebody's proud of you, even if you can't see him anymore. The camera pulled back as the lights softened, bathing the stage in a golden hue. Steve placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, the boy smiling quietly, his family surrounding him in a soft embrace. And for that one fleeting moment, Family Feud wasn't about surveys or laughter. It was about legacy, the kind that outlives a name, a game, even time itself. When the cameras went to commercial break, no one on that stage moved. The crew didn't rush in. The audience didn't chatter. The usual buzz that fills the room between takes was replaced by something else: reverence. A sacred kind of silence that only happens when truth has been spoken. Steve Harvey stood there, his hand still resting gently on Marcus's shoulder. The boy was looking down now, blinking back tears he hadn't meant to shed on national television. His mother stood behind him, quietly reaching out to wipe one from his cheek. The gesture was so tender that even the lighting tech up in the rafters turned away for a moment, overwhelmed. Steve took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, his voice soft but steady when he finally spoke. You okay, son? Marcus nodded. Yes, sir. Just feels good to say it out loud. That line hit Steve like a chord struck too deep. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he murmured. Sometimes saying it out loud's the first step to healing. When the break ended, the producers tried to reset the stage, but the audience wouldn't stop clapping. A standing ovation, not for a funny answer or a win, but for courage, for honesty, for a boy who had turned grief into grace. Steve smiled faintly, shaking his head. All right, he said, chuckling through the emotion. We gon' try and keep playing this game, but I don't know how y'all expect me to get through this one. The audience laughed gently, easing the heaviness with warmth. The next round began, but something subtle had shifted. Every question now felt like a reflection of life itself. Name something that makes a home feel like love. Name something people pass down through generations. The answers came, but none of them mattered as much as what lingered underneath. Family, memory, and love that doesn't leave when a person does. During the final question of the segment, Marcus buzzed in again. The question read, Name something you say when you miss someone. The buzzer light flashed red beneath his hand. He hesitated for a heartbeat, then said quietly, See you soon. The room went silent again. Steve froze, blinking back tears that threatened to return. He repeated the words, almost under his breath. See you soon. The scoreboard blinked. Ding. Top answer. The crowd applauded softly, not cheering, but acknowledging. Steve looked at Marcus, studying the boy's expression. There was peace in his face now. He wasn't trembling anymore. The weight of his loss was still there, but something about saying those words, speaking them into the air where his father might somehow hear them, seemed to have lifted a piece of the burden. Steve smiled, then did something the audience didn't expect. He stepped away from his podium and walked around to the Harris family's side of the stage. The cameras followed. He reached Marcus, put a hand on his back, and said quietly, Come here, man. The boy turned, and Steve pulled him into a hug, a strong, fatherly embrace. It wasn't planned. It wasn't staged. It just happened, naturally, as if the space demanded it. The audience erupted again, many standing, many crying. The lights caught the moment perfectly. the gleam of tears on both their faces, the warmth in the host's hand as it patted the boy's back, the soft tremor in the boy's shoulders as he finally let go of what he'd been holding in. Steve's voice was muffled against the microphone. "Your dad's watching, son. You just made him proud." When they pulled apart, Marcus's mother was crying openly now, smiling through it. The crowd clapped again, softer this time, slower. Steve gestured toward her. "You raised a fine young man, ma'am," he said. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely carrying to the microphone. "He's his father's son." Steve smiled, shaking his head. "No, ma'am. He's his father's legacy." Applause filled the studio once more, but this time it was more than appreciation, it was connection, the kind that threads strangers together through empathy. The rest of the taping moved in slow motion, like the show itself didn't want to end. The Harris family laughed through their tears, missing a few answers, cheering anyway. Steve cracked gentle jokes, but his tone was different now, quieter, more mindful. He didn't rush them. He didn't fill the silence. He just let the room be. When the episode wrapped, Steve stood center stage with the family one last time. "You know," he said, glancing down at Marcus, "a lot of folks tune into this show just to laugh. But today, y'all gave us something deeper. Y'all reminded us that laughter's strongest when it comes from a place of love." He turned to the audience, his voice soft but firm. "We all lose somebody. But the truth is, if they taught us how to love, then they're never really gone. They just move into our hearts and live there forever." The audience nodded, some clapping, some crying, some holding hands. The camera zoomed in one last time on Marcus, standing under the glow of the Family Feud logo, his mother's arm around his shoulder, his eyes bright with tears but his mouth curved in a peaceful smile. Steve looked directly into the lens, speaking not as a host now, but as a man who understood. If you still got somebody you love, call 'em. Tell 'em. Don't wait. And if you lost somebody you can't call anymore, tell God to tell 'em for you. The crowd erupted in applause once more, the kind that comes from every corner of the soul. Steve nodded, smiling through tears. "That's what this show's about," he said softly. "Family. Always." And as the lights dimmed to gold, the audience stood in a silent ovation. The cameras faded to black, but the moment didn't end there. Because sometimes, one boy's courage can stop time and remind the world what love looks like when it refuses to fade. When the cameras finally stopped, Steve Harvey didn't move. The set was still glowing under the soft golden light, but the noise, the show energy, it had all melted away. He stood quietly at his podium, head bowed, hands clasped together. The audience, still in their seats, seemed unwilling to leave. Some were whispering prayers. Others were just sitting in silence, as if they were inside a church, not a game show studio. Marcus and his family gathered near the edge of the stage. They weren't celebrating points or prizes. They weren't even thinking about the cameras anymore. They were holding hands, mother, son, daughter, breathing together, holding each other up in the way families do when words no longer suffice. Steve took a deep breath, looking at them from across the stage. Then, without a word, he walked over. His shoes clicked softly against the floor. When he reached them, he didn't say anything right away. He just stood there beside them, hands in his pockets, eyes glistening. "You know," he finally said, his voice low and gentle, "I meet a lot of families here. But what y'all brought today, that was something special. That wasn't just a story about loss. That was a story about love that still knows how to live." Diane Harris, Marcus's mother, smiled faintly, tears still clinging to her lashes. "He's been trying so hard, Mr. Harvey. To be strong, to keep his dad's promise." Steve nodded, his voice quiet. "He don't gotta try anymore, ma'am. He's already done it." He turned to Marcus, who stood tall beside his sister. "Son, you did something today that even grown men struggle to do. You spoke love out loud, and that's bravery in its purest form." Marcus lowered his eyes, a tear slipping free. Steve reached forward, gently tipping the boy's chin up. "You keep walking that road, you hear me? You keep being brave, keep showing up. That's what heroes do." The boy nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Harvey." Steve smiled softly. "Nah, Thank you." Behind them, one of the camera operators was openly crying, his headset pressed to his chest. Another crew member, a young woman holding a clipboard, wiped her face with her sleeve. For a moment, the Family Feud stage didn't feel like a television set. It felt like a sacred space, where strangers had just shared something profoundly human. Steve motioned for the family to come closer. "Let me tell y'all something," he said, his tone fatherly now. "I've been blessed to make people laugh my whole life, but every once in a while, God sends somebody through that door to remind me of what laughter's made for. It ain't just for jokes, it's for healin'." Diane's hand went to her heart. "That's what Sam used to say," she whispered. Steve looked at her, curious. "He'd say," she continued, "if you can make someone laugh on their hardest day, you just gave them a piece of heaven." Steve froze for a second, the air catching in his chest. Then, quietly, he said, "Well, ma'am, I reckon he gave you a whole lot of heaven." The audience, still watching, erupted in soft applause again, moved by the simple beauty of the exchange. Steve stepped forward, extending his arms. "Come here," he said. The whole Harris family moved into a hug, mother, daughter, son, with Steve at the center, his tall frame folding around them protectively. The lights glowed brighter, golden rays wrapping the group like sunlight breaking through clouds. When they finally pulled apart, Steve smiled through tears. "I tell you what," he said, "I'm keeping a picture of y'all in my dressing room. A reminder that even when the world feels heavy, love still wins." The audience clapped again, and as the family stepped down from the stage, Steve stood watching them go. Marcus turned one last time, lifting a small wave. Steve raised his hand back, smiling. It was one of those moments that felt final and eternal all at once. Later that night, after the taping ended and the studio emptied, Steve sat alone in his dressing room. The laughter from the day had faded, replaced by silence. The air smelled faintly of stage lights and coffee. On the counter before him sat the cue cards from the show, questions about surveys, about laughter, about life's small trivia. But tucked among them, he noticed something, folded a handwritten note. He opened it carefully. "Dear Mr. Harvey, thank you for letting us share our story. My dad always said courage isn't about not crying, it's about showing up anyway. Today, we showed up. Love, Marcus." Steve sat back in his chair, eyes wet again. He folded the note neatly, pressing it to his chest. "You sure did, son," he whispered. He looked at himself in the mirror, the suit still sharp, the lights dimmed to a soft gold. And for a long time, he just sat there, thinking about fathers and sons, about promises kept, about how sometimes the simplest words, "be brave," could change the world, if you said them with love. He knew millions would see that episode. He knew it would make people cry, maybe even call their parents, maybe whisper something to heaven before bed. And in that quiet, he smiled. Because sometimes, television isn't just noise. Sometimes, it's a prayer you didn't know you needed to hear. And on that night, as Steve Harvey turned off the lights and walked out of the studio, he carried that prayer with him, glowing like a small flame against the dark. The episode aired 2 weeks later on a quiet Sunday evening. Nobody at the network expected what was about to happen. It began like any other broadcast, the familiar Family Feud theme, the laughter, the quick cuts between smiles and applause. But when the camera found Marcus, when his calm voice filled living rooms across the world and he said, "How to be brave," everything changed. By the time the credits rolled, something had stirred deep inside millions of viewers. It wasn't just entertainment anymore. It was a mirror, a reflection of love, loss, and courage that belonged to all of us. In homes from Atlanta to Anchorage, people sat in silence long after the show ended. Some picked up the phone to call their fathers. Others walked quietly into their children's rooms, just to kiss them on the forehead. A woman in Ohio wrote online, "I turned on Family Feud to laugh, but ended up crying in front of my TV. That boy reminded me of my own son I lost 10 years ago. I finally felt peace tonight." The clip went viral within hours. The moment when Steve Harvey set down his cue cards, the tear sliding down his cheek as he whispered, "Your daddy's proud, son," spread across social media like wildfire. Hashtags flooded timelines. Number Be Brave Like Marcus. Number Steve Harvey Moment. Number Stories That Heal. The video racked up millions of views in just a few days. But what mattered most wasn't the numbers. It was what people felt. A high school teacher in Texas played the clip in her classroom, telling her students, "This is what character looks like." A firefighter in Boston sent a letter to the show saying, "Samuel Harris gave his son the best lesson a man can leave behind. We're proud to wear the same uniform he did." Churches began using the clip during sermons about legacy and fatherhood. For weeks, Steve's team received thousands of messages, handwritten letters, emails, voice notes from people who had lost someone and found comfort in that single word: bravery. In one particularly moving message, a 2-year-old girl wrote, "My mom passed away last year. I saw Marcus talk about his dad, and it made me want to make her proud too. I told my teacher I want to be brave like him." Steve read that letter in his office, eyes welling up once again. He placed it next to Marcus's handwritten note and whispered, "You're still helping people, son. Look at that." The Harris family didn't expect any of it. They watched the broadcast together at home, Diane holding her children close on the couch, a framed photo of Samuel on the mantel beside them. When they saw Marcus on screen, speaking about his father with that steady voice, Diane broke down, not from sadness but from pride. Marcus turned to her as the show ended. "Do you think Dad saw it?" Diane smiled through tears. "Baby, he was there before anyone else." That week, Steve invited them back not to play, but to talk. No cameras, no audience, just a quiet afternoon on set. He sat with them on the Family Feud stage, the same place where it all happened, the lights dimmed low. "I wanted to tell y'all something," he said softly. "You didn't just honor your father, you honored every person who's ever loved somebody enough to keep their memory alive." Diane nodded, her voice trembling. "We just told the truth. I think the world needed a little more of that." Steve smiled. "You're right. Truth's what heals. Always." He turned to Marcus, studying the young man's calm face. "So what's next for you?" Marcus hesitated, then smiled. "I want to be a firefighter, like my dad." Steve's expression shifted pride mixed with awe. "Son, you're already halfway there. You got the heart for it." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small pin, a gold emblem that said, "Faith, Family, Courage." He fastened it carefully onto Marcus's shirt. "This one's from my own collection," he said. "It's a reminder that even when the lights go out, you still shine." Marcus looked at it, speechless. His sister squeezed his hand. Diane wiped her eyes. When they left the studio that day, the staff stood along the hallway, applauding quietly as they walked past. No music, no cameras, just pure respect. Outside, as the sun set over Atlanta, the light hit the building in a way that painted the windows in gold. Marcus turned back for a moment, looking at the Family Feud logo glowing above the doors. "He'd be proud," he whispered. Diane smiled. "He is." Months passed. Life went on. But the story didn't fade. It became something people returned to whenever the world felt too heavy, proof that even in grief, grace can find a way to speak. And every time Steve Harvey hosted a new family, greeted a new group of laughing faces, he carried a small reminder with him. On the edge of his podium, taped neatly beside the microphone, was a folded piece of paper with 3 words written in blue ink: "Be brave. Always." He looked at it before every show. It wasn't superstition, it was prayer. And sometimes, when a contestant seemed nervous or uncertain, Steve would smile and say quietly, "You're doing fine. Just be brave." Because of one teenager's answer, millions were reminded that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about showing up for love, even when it hurts. It started as a game, but it ended as a message that traveled across hearts, homes, and time. Because sometimes, one voice, steady, trembling, honest, is enough to heal the world for a moment. And as the credits rolled on that unforgettable episode, the camera lingered on Steve Harvey, wiping a tear and smiling, whispering what everyone watching already felt. Sometimes, television doesn't just entertain, it heals. If this story touched your heart, Subscribe and share so the world never forgets moments like these. This is Stories Left Behind, where human stories are never lost.